Hi, this is Luca, and I have a question for Cambridge Department of Politics Professor, PhD Professor Maha, Ann, and Jude.
Dear Professor Maha, Ann, and Jude of the Department of Politics of Cambridge University. From the start, Giulio Regeni in Italy never graduated any further diploma or university degree, but completed only the compulsory education at the age of 13, like everyone. Then, after 2 years in the college oratory of the bishop in New Mexico, he registered Oxford with the recommendation of the bishop for diploma and degrees he never had, and then Cambridge, consulting the think tank and Oxford Analytica with the big data professor Ann. A similar story is from Cécile Kyenge, confessing during a television interview that she knew she didn't have the rights for the documents she was asking for, the passport and the funding to register the university, but thanks to the network of friends of the bishop in the public offices, she had all the documents she needed, and later she was also elected member of the parliament and appointed minister for integration and equal opportunity.
E quindi come è arrivata in Italia?
Quindi attraverso il vescovo della mia città e abbiamo trovato una borsa di studio per andare a studiare all'Università Cattolica di Roma. Attraverso loro, che sono suore laiche, mi hanno dato la possibilità di avere anche dei documenti, perché se non hai la borsa di studio.
But my point here is to address the system of corruption and not the individuals. Cécile Kyenge and Giulio Regeni are just 2 examples of the several thousand students they represent, superior students above the average from the college oratory of the bishop with the recommendation for diploma and degree they never had. Honest and trustable people with the rights to feel honest also after the confession of their frauds and scam is public knowledge in the news. I'm doing this because, on the other hand, the other students are blackmailed for the confirmation of their true academic career from state university and become impostor and paperless within the border of the European Union, and are coerced with violence to be the scapegoat and are prevented from their rights in order to cover up that alternative system of value, the system of value of the recommendation, bribery, and blackmail, the alternative system of value you, Professor Maha, you promote in the classroom as democracy for the high standard of your selected students above the average. Dear Professor Maha, Ann, and Jude, you are the PhD professors of Giulio Regeni in politics. Maybe I'm not obedient like Giulio Regeni, but I have better reason, and my documented and objective question for you is this. On the 3rd of January 1925, Mussolini said that the democratic value have to be found in the Catholic tradition. Then he dismissed the parliament and persecuted the opposition as apostates of the faith and enemy of the state. I wonder, if someone was to ask you to state one democratic value that has ever been a Catholic value in history, would you be able, or you better to admit you mislead, brainwash, and discriminate the students in favor of an alternative system of value? Surely, if your superior students such as Regeni really want to graduate with Cambridge honors, then they should be able to state one democratic value that has ever been a Catholic value in history. I ask because the democratic value are the result of the emancipation, from the absolute power of the Church, and the democratic value, especially the freedom of choice and the secular value of justice, have been persecuted throughout history as Catholic heresy, undermining the absolute power of the Church in the quest for the absolute obedience. There is absolutely no way any democratic value has ever been a Catholic value until Mussolini said so, closed the parliament, and persecuted the opposition as apostates of the faith and enemy of the state, anticipating the words of his spiritual leader repeated after World War II in the excommunication of the democratic value and all those making common cause with it. Dear Chancellor, Right Honourable David John Sainsbury, Baron Sainsbury of Thornville, could you state one democratic value that has ever been a Catholic value in history? I wonder if someone pretending the democratic value are Catholic legacy may be able to distinguish good and evil at all. As a matter of fact, only a fascist or an idiot would pretend the democratic value are Catholic legacy and the reconstitution of the fascist party is a crime. Could you state one democratic value that has ever been a Catholic value in history? Or this is just a plain reconstitution of the fascist party, Mr. Chancellor? So I like to ask the PhD professor of Giulio Regeni if they could state one democratic value that has ever been a Catholic value in history, or they could only quote the speech of Mussolini for this explanation, pretending the democratic value have to be found within the Catholic tradition, with the recommendations of the bishop. I'm impressed. The PhD tutor of Giulio Regeni, Maha Abdelram, Department of Politics and International Studies of Cambridge University, cannot explain in what way the democratic value have become Catholic legacy. But if you spend a moment, you understand without the tutor from Cambridge that the democratic value are the result of the emancipation from the absolute power of the Church, and only a fascist or an idiot would pretend the democratic value have ever been Catholic value. Also, the reformation of the churches was about rights and freedoms more than religion, but considering the education at £12,000 per year and more, it is a good business and even better propaganda at geopolitical scale. In fact, after the students have paid all that money, they feel to be intelligent and superiorly educated. I wonder if the academic referee of Giulio Regeni, Anne Alexander, or the head of the department, Professor Jude Brown, could rank themselves and Giulio Regeni above the average against every standard, or only against the standard they represent, the standard of the recommendation of the bishop. I also wonder about the right wing's manipulation, from the school books to the big data statistics. I wonder about Regeni as consultant for the think tank and Oxford Analytica, with the recommendation of the bishop for diploma and degree in EVRED, with the big data professor as assistant and Cambridge Analytica ancilla fidei. I wonder about the honesty of such good professor and politician concerning people's rights and the system of recommendation they represent. Furthermore, concerning Professor Anne feeling compelled to ride and campaign against Al-Sisi as the responsible for civil rights violations, I like to inform concerning civil rights violations and abuses against European Union citizens that actually happen in England reducing the victim into slavery with violence and coercion.
I want to show that they are in solidarity with people in Egypt who are defending democratic rights and standing up for freedom. I think we've sent a clear message tonight, but we need to say it louder and more urgently. We need to make sure that Abdel Fattah al-Sisi can't go around the world pretending that...
This is a true story, and you can find the documents in the appendix of my book. As you can see, I am from Italy and I arrived in England because I organized a PhD opportunity in autonomy. I had a PhD offer, but the professors in the photograph of my graduation ceremony at the Verona University did not confirm my academic career to Leeds University, consequentially making me do the impression of an impostor and a counterfeiter. I highlight that the Italian consulate never provided any assistance, nothing more than imposing on me to be a paperless impostor. In fact, the Italian consulate never provided any passport replacement after its theft, which prevented me from the right to hire a lawyer. As you can see in appendix, the police headquarters in Milan issue my passport. Sometime later confirm my address and my presence in person with the signature of police inspector. To the same address, I also received a letter from the President of the Italian Republic concerning the subject in discussion. So I had a PhD offer, but I had become paperless, an impostor and a counterfeiter in the UK. The European Union sent my lawsuit to Italy, conveying my rights for traveling and fulfill the opportunities I organized in autonomy, but the prosecutor in Italy in 2005 stated that it has never happened. This letter is from your Prime Minister Tony Blair in 2006, before his conversion to Catholic, but after the European Union sent my lawsuit to Italy. I like to address the false accusation, coercion, and violence I had with the reply, the retaliation, and the political cover-up. This is from the barrister Paul Diamond, informing that a lawsuit should be brought against the Italian Foreign Office for the assistance provided by the consul in making me paperless and looking like I am the impostor, for preventing me from fulfill the PhD offer I had, and for preventing me from the right to hire a lawyer and from traveling. It is also concerning civil rights and reducing people into slavery with violence and coercion in order to cover up complaint and evidences, and to make a scapegoat out of the victims. In addition to this perjury of public officers, they also go on to accuse victims of having reasons to become terrorists and plot mass murders, and give them excuses to warrant their arrest in the name of national security and public order. On the other hand, the tradition of bribery and blackmail with the Holy Cross in the Italian courtrooms, transforming the forgery and the perjury of public officers into acts of devotion and career opportunity. This is the Catholic culture and tradition, and the supposed divine rights they claim to perpetrate whatever crime and abuses in the name of their religion.
What we've tried to do is establish what we think about the things that we were told at the beginning. You are no different, I agree with you. But what we were told at the beginning, all of these things at the beginning, we were told that you had a mental illness, we were told that you were very risky,
Yes.
we were told all of these things.
All these things.
And since that time, what we've done is that we've seen you on a regular basis. You've been kind enough to agree to see us, even though you didn't see the merit in doing that at the beginning, to see whether there was anything that we could see in terms of illness, but also to try to support you with the things that you wanted to do to get a bit more established and to be generally a bit happier with how things are. Not that I know what would make you happy. It's not anything that we're doing. It's much, it's a different thing, isn't it? Now, throughout the time that we've seen you, my honest opinion of what I think, I believe in being honest, is that I don't see that you have an illness. What I see is that you've had very difficult circumstances to have to deal with. In terms of what we do, we have a lack of illness going on. If we are not doing any other psychological interventions that are relevant to any of these things, if we are not doing anything else, then
what are we
doing?
What
so if you say
we dealing with?
If you say that you're the same person as you were before,
I've never changed it.
Yeah. But our response to you has changed. The reason it's changed is because we needed to establish ourselves. All of these things at the beginning, we were told that you had a mental illness, we were told that you were very risky,
Yes.
we were told all of these things.
All these things.
And since that time,
what are we
doing?
What
so if you say
we dealing with?
We were told that you were very risky,
Yes.
we were told all of these things.
All these things.
And since that time,
what are we
doing?
What
so if you say
we dealing with?
What I find very, very funny is that nobody of you ever asked himself, how can a person live in this situation? With no passport, with degree cancelled, job
How do
opportunity
you know that
cancelled.
nobody's asked themselves that question? I've asked myself that question when I've seen you. And I think it's an intolerable way to have to live. And I think it's an intolerable way to have to live. And I think it's an intolerable way to have to live. And I think it's an intolerable way to have to live.
Dear Right Honorable Mr. Said Javid, my name is Luca, I'm from Italy, and the best way to explain it to you is with a quote from my book, reading that only a fascist or an idiot would pretend the democratic value or Catholic legacy without being able to tell any of this democratic value of Catholic origin. This is why Mussolini made it a religion of state, with secret police, inquisition, and intellectual cleansing to persecute the opposition as apostates of the faith, as it was a true religious war against heretics. So, I'm here to address your approximate and patchy education, oratory-like, with a few questions for you and the best professor you can find at Oxford and Cambridge, if they feel they can help you. Dear Mr. Right Honorable Javid, the 3rd of January 1925, Mussolini said that the democratic value have to be found in the Catholic tradition. Then he dismissed the parliament and persecuted the opposition as apostates of the faith and enemy of the state. What do you know about the intellectual cleansing of Mussolini? What do you know about the fascist persecution of the Democrats as apostates of the faith and enemy of the state? Do you believe it didn't happen because it is not in your Catholic school books? Mussolini closed the parliament in 1925, 14 years before he enacted the racial law in December 1938. Why don't you ask the senator for life, Liliana Segre? She was there, she can tell you. The Holocaust for the Democrats started 14 years before, and still today has not ended yet. In fact, after World War II, the Holocaust for the Senator for Life Liliana Segre was ended, but for the Democrats, the excommunication of the democratic value was to renew the principle inspiring the fascist regime, as stated in the Concordat, and still today the democratic value have to be found in the fascist regime of Mussolini. How do you believe some people may have recommendations for diploma and degree they never had, while the other cannot have confirmation of their true academic career from state university, become paperless, and are coerced to be the impostor to cover up administrative horrors of your holy democracy? Concerning the excommunication of the democratic value, the reason is that the clergy never like to be treated as commoners. They don't like to be subject to the common law, and as consequence, they had a campaign against communism, with the excommunication of the communists and those making common cause with them, demanding the secular value of justice not to be postponed into the afterlife. The matter in discussion were not the value of the Communist Party, but the value of the common law and the secular value of justice to limit their pretense of absolute power and tyranny. In fact, the clergy loves to be above the law and reveals in this immunity selling passports and recommendations for diploma and degree to their devoted customers, like indulgency for every abuse and every idiot they can exploit, knowing that the Holy Cross in the courtrooms will transform the perjury of public officers into acts of devotion and career opportunity, reinterpreting their good intentions. Dear Mr. Right Honorable Saeed Javid, only an idiot or a fascist would pretend the democratic value are Catholic legacy. Can you find a professor good enough to tell how the Catholic heresy have become Catholic legacy? Why don't you ask the Italian ambassador about the assistance they provided after they vanished my degree and made me look like an impostor, after they made me paperless, preventing me from the rights to hire a lawyer? Why don't you ask your Prime Minister Tony Blair about this? Why don't you ask the Prime Minister Tony Blair about this? This letter is from his office when he was in office and was dealing with Dr. David Kelly. Do you remember of Dr. David Kelly? Why don't you ask the police about my report? Why don't you ask the Italian newspaper La Repubblica? They have a competition for the best professor in Italy. Ask them to tell you one democratic value that has ever been a Catholic value in history. Ask them how the democratic value have become Catholic legacy. Ask them what system of value is transforming the perjury of public officers into acts of devotion and career opportunities. There are more than 9 million backlog legal cases, but the most significant cases are not in that list because they pretend they never happen. Concerning the democratic value and the Holocaust, you should apologize to Mr. Corbyn for your incompetence, but I understand you are functional, instrumental to cover up the racist tradition of your colleagues. Dear Member of Parliament, Right Honourable Miss Nusrat Ghani, could you tell one democratic value that has ever been a Catholic value in history? Can you see the average where it is from where you are? You studied politics. Ask Oxford and Cambridge to help you to find an answer. Concerning the definition of Islamophobia, I see you are dedicated to alternative system of value, and the democratic value are not of your concern, but eventually to prevaricate the rule of the law with some more alternative system of value based on high moral grounds. From the moral point of view, you can pretend the democratic value are Catholic legacy, but recommend the necessity for a definition of Islamophobia. Can you see how functional and instrumental and poorly educated you are? Why don't you ask someone like you, someone spiritual, expert with multiple system of value, honest in conscience and with faith in God like you? Ask the bishop how the democratic value have become Catholic legacy. In the words of the ancient Romans, the pre-Christian, the people of faith and morality, like the Christians, with their alternative system of value, were just uncivilized barbarians, sociopaths, disrespecting the law and other people's rights. How do you believe to be different with your alternative system of value compared to the alternative system of value of someone else? And what about my true rights not to be the impostor and the official system of value you don't care be got above the average with your multi-system of value? The Democrats don't have the rights for a definition of democracy since the 3rd of January 1925, and you ask the definition of Islamophobia. Can you see? You are instrumental to cover up the racist tradition of the most racist right wing. How do you pretend to have rights the native Democrats cannot have because of religious dogmas and mafia that are above the law? Dear Member of Parliament, Right Honorable Nadim Zahawi, Education Secretary, I feel confident you can provide an answer for my question, will you? Dear Member of Parliament Kwasi Kwarteng, Secretary of State for Business, I see you have been in all places a student would dream of, from Eton to Harvard and Cambridge. What a misery! You cannot tell one democratic value that has ever been a Catholic value in history, despite of the level of the tuition you have had. Since you are a businessman, my question for you would be about Brexit. I would like you to find one professor of yours from Harvard to confirm that cutting 20% of the biggest spenders from the market could improve the economy. Let's try with the opposition. Dear Member of Parliament, Right Honourable Mr. Keir Starmer, concerning your complaint to Boris Johnson for parroting fascists, I have become paperless in your country, Mr. Starmer, and your public officers couldn't find anything better than imposing it on me to prevent me from the rights to hire a lawyer and cover up the Italian mafia. So they made it with recommendations that I would be an impostor, a counterfeiter, and after the European Union sent lawsuit to Italy, and the prosecutor swept the case into the afterlife for justice, I have been tortured in your country, Mr. Starmer, to cover up your alternative system of value. Since you claim you fought the fascists, ask Tony Blair what he would do concerning European Union citizens, paperless like illegal immigrants, claiming for their rights not to be the impostor just to cover up the good tradition of bribery and blackmail. This is from the office of Tony Blair after the European Union sent lawsuit to Italy. This is from your Prime Minister Boris Johnson. This is from the President of the Italian Republic. And this is from secret police making territorial bans on YouTube videos, repeating on the internet the lawsuit the courts of justice sweep into the afterlife. What kind of labor are you? A new labor, Mr. Starmer? Also Mussolini was a socialist like you, and the reformation of the churches was more about rights and freedoms than religion. What about my rights not to be the impostor in order to cover up the administrative horrors of this alternative system of value, the moral foundation of fascism that still today vanishes people into thin air, paperless like illegal immigrants within the border of the European Union? I have no rights to hire a lawyer because I have no passport, and the solicitor provided by the Citizen Advice Bureau told me to conform to the will of the consul and be paperless. What a bigotry, Mr. Starmer, what a bigotry, and what a misery. No professor, no member of parliament are able to tell one democratic value that has ever been a Catholic value in history and still believe to be Democrats and well-educated. But I am not the impostor, and making people paperless is criminal. So I report racist-motivated hate crimes, violence and coercion against the victims. European Union citizens you have made paperless, victims refusing to be the scapegoat of your alternative system of value. I like to report the torture, the entrapment you force against the victims with coercion and violence to cover up the administrative horrors you organize, and the incitement to commit a crime as the only way out. This is slavery and torture, as it was stated by barrister Paul Diamond, and what Tony Blair did was to cover up the administrative horrors with more recommendations, violence and coercion. Ask the Italian ambassador why they never complain about this situation of political and religious convenience.
Hi, this is Luca, and I have a question for Cambridge Department of Politics Professor, PhD Professor Maha, Anne and Jude.
I want to show that they are in solidarity with people in Egypt who are defending democratic rights and standing up for freedom. I think we've sent a clear message tonight, but we need to say it louder and more urgently. We need to make sure that Abdel Fattah al-Sisi can't go around the world pretending that